Okay, so here we go.
To end the war in Ukraine. He was speaking after talks were held today in Saudi Arabia, where Russian and American diplomats discussed ending Russia's 3-year campaign. More on those talks in a moment, but first let's go straight to Washington and to our North America editor, Sarah Smith. Sarah, what more did the president say?
Well, he said he thinks he's the only person in the world who can end this war, as well as saying that he has the power to end it, and also repeating that if he had been in the White House 3 years ago, this war would never have begun. Now, that was because Vladimir Putin would not have dared to invade Ukraine if Donald Trump had been the president of the...
So let me address this. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I don't know that I really support any politicians these days, but let me say this. Vladimir Putin himself said in 2022 that if Donald Trump had been in office, he probably would not have invaded Ukraine. Here's the problem. They already invaded Ukraine back in 2014. Now, again, that was back when Barack Obama was in office. So, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. All we know is what we can kind of see. Let's continue.
The United States. But speaking a few minutes ago from his Florida residence in Mar-a-Lago, he seemed to be blaming Ukraine for not having made a deal with Russia prior to the invasion. He seemed to be saying that if he had been in office, then he would have forced a deal that anybody, he said, could have negotiated a better deal where they would have given up a little bit of land, not too much, and been able to avoid this war. Have a listen to what he...
I would like to hear how Ukraine started the war. Seems kind of strange that they would start the war.
He had to say,
I think I have the power to end this war.
Okay, so he does have the power to end the war. Every United States president has the power to end the war. The question is, how are they going to go about it? How are they going to use that power to end the war?
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made it.
Okay, first of all, they've been there for 3 years. Yeah, they were there for 3 years because they were brought into it. They've actually been in it since 2014, but he doesn't recognize that. To indicate that they should have never started it, I don't really think President Trump meant that. I just think the reporter pushed him past the point of where he really wanted to go with it. So he does what he seems to always do when he gets pushed too far, and that's just make outlandish statements. But let me explain something that everybody already knows. That's why a person in this position should not be just making such outlandish statements, because what the President of the United States says is power. Let's go.
A deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way.
Who chose not to do it that way? Ukraine chose not to do it that way? And I'm not even 100% sure in the president's usage of the word us, that he really means us, them, like as in Ukraine, they.
Now, of course, when he was saying that Ukraine was complaining about not being invited, that was because they were not part of those talks that took place between America and Russia in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so Ukraine was not invited. This is not an official, quote, negotiation. This is exactly what presidents do and have done. They go and they talk. Okay, anybody who gets excluded from this talk shouldn't have their panties in a wad. Okay, this is just like me picking up the phone and calling someone to talk about something that would affect somebody else, but I'm not including them in on it because I need to get understanding of what I'm dealing with before I go and talk to that person. It's really kind of the same thing to a degree, but just on a way bigger level. You know, as good faith could they have let or offered or invited somebody from Ukraine or Europe to go and at least be there as a sign of respect? They could have, in my opinion. Should they have? Maybe, maybe not. If I were having a discussion like the one I just talked about, I wouldn't necessarily invite the person I was going to be, or the issue that I was going to be talking about. I wasn't going to invite the people in that I'm having the issue with to talk about it so they can hear it. Okay, sometimes the best negotiations happen when you know that it's happening, but you don't know always exactly what's happening. And hopefully, that kind of makes sense. Let's go.
Day. Now, from the State Department, from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, we heard that those were not negotiations about how to end the war. They were simply initial talks between America and Russia, who will now put together top teams who will speak to each other about the parameters of how the war might end. And the Secretary of State was very clear. He said if they do get to the point of actually negotiating what a peace deal or a ceasefire might look like, at that point Ukraine will be brought into the talks and some European nations will be consulted. But for now, those talks are very much between only the United States and Russia.
Thank you very much, Sarah Smith there in Washington. Well, there were extraordinary scenes in Saudi Arabia where...
The thing is, it's kind of gross to be giving Russia that kind of power to pull us into negotiations. But, negotiating with somebody who shouldn't even be in power. But on the same token, you got to start somewhere, people. You got to start somewhere. You got to do something different to get a different result. And let's be clear, what they said at the beginning is true. The president said from the beginning, the last 3 years shouldn't have happened. And I think that's basically what he's trying to get to, regardless of who started it, which we know who started it. Okay. The last 3 years didn't have to happen. Now, with that said, I don't put any blame on anybody. The President Biden, Vice President Harris, any of the past presidents. I don't put a blame on any of that. But it didn't have to happen, and it wouldn't have happened if Russia would have been in check. But Biden didn't speak to Vladimir Putin. Maybe he should have. You can argue or debate that. Let's go.
Where Russian and American diplomats on opposite sides for so many years held 4 hours of talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. One of those at the table, the Russian foreign minister, is even under US sanctions for the part he's played in the war. The two countries agreed to press ahead with negotiations. The talks are part of a flurry of diplomacy focused on Ukraine this week. Crucially, as you heard, neither Ukraine nor Europe were invited to the talks with US and Russian officials, which took place in Riyadh this morning. Instead, the US...
So the way that I kind of look at this is kind of like this. If you've got somebody who is locked up for whatever, they still have or should be able to speak to somebody in the middle about their legal situation. If we always adopt the stance that because Putin is a war criminal, he should be locked up, or whatever the argument would be on, them being sanctioned or whatever, as a reason to never talk to him, then nothing's ever going to get fixed. You got to talk to make a deal. Just like an attorney would go into a prison and speak to somebody who they're supposed to be representing, whether they like what they did, agree with what they did, or don't. They still have to talk to find out and get to the bottom of whatever's going on. It's the same thing, people. Somebody's got to go in and talk. That's the only way to stop all this nonsense.
US envoy Keith Kellogg is being dispatched to meet Ukrainian officials separately in Kiev. And while Russia and the US were talking, Ukraine's President Zelensky was in Turkey with President Erdogan. Yesterday, European leaders held an emergency summit in Paris to discuss Ukraine and European security, underlining the unease being felt about President Trump's plans to resolve the war. Our State Department correspondent Tom...
Hey, at least they're all talking about it now, right? Were they talking about it before? Some say they were, some say they weren't, but it's being covered now anyway.
Bateman is travelling with the American delegation and has been covering the meeting in Riyadh.
Face to face in a Saudi royal palace, a picture that makes history. Here was the US, the biggest single backer of Ukraine, sitting down with its friend's enemy, Russia.
Okay, so let's not make too much of that, okay? They try to make this out like it's a horrible thing, and maybe it is to a certain degree, but you have to sit down and talk to your enemy. You have to sit down and talk to your friend's enemy. I mean, if you don't, how are you ever going to stop anything? How are you ever going to start anything? That's what negotiations are. Let's not focus on sitting down with your enemy or sitting down with your friend's enemy. Come on. Can we focus on what the real issue is here and not that? Let's go.
Both sides were silent and stony-faced for the media, but Vladimir Putin's team clearly happy that President Trump had ended their isolation and the world was about to be shown it.
We were brought in for a short amount of time at the very start of the meeting. So the doors opened, the press brought in, and then we saw that extraordinary scene. The first time any such face-to-face meeting has taken place at that level in 3 years.
Amid the surging...
Okay, so let me explain something. Yes, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to let you go in. They don't give a rat's butt about you right now. Okay, their focus is what they're there to do. So let's not focus on that either. See, we got to learn to make the main thing here, people, as someone used to say in a church I used to go to. Focus on the right thing, okay? They're not going to let you in. They don't give a rat's butt that you're even there.
Anxiety in Europe over these talks, I shouted questions for Marco Rubio.
Is the US sidelining Ukraine, Mr. Secretary? What concessions will there be asked of Russia, Mr. Secretary?
There was no answer.
I find this interesting. Do you think he's going to answer you? He ain't there to speak to you. He is not there to speak to you. Again, he doesn't give a rat's ass that you're there or that you even exist right now. He is there on a mission. And let me say something to this. Whether I support Trump or I don't, Marco Rubio is a very good negotiator. He is the perfect person that Trump could have picked to be the Secretary of State. So don't focus on the fact that he didn't answer your little question, okay? Let him do his job because he's one of the competent people that Trump has, one of the few.
And the doors were firmly closed. If the US was demanding any concessions of Moscow, they weren't telling anyone else today. The Americans called the talks upbeat and constructive. They even had time to eat with the foreign minister they sanction.
Does that matter? They eat with the foreign minister they sanction. Give me a break. Let's go.
After this break, there was a working lunch, a symphony of scallops and ribeye steak on the menu.
I came away today convinced that they are willing to begin to engage in a serious process to determine how and how quickly and through what mechanism can an end be brought to this war. Whether we can ultimately reach that outcome will obviously depend on every side in this conflict's willingness to agree to certain things.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this here because I've had about enough. Let me just explain to people, whether you agree or you disagree with me, that's fine. Whether you agree or disagree with how they're handling it, that's fine. Whether you voted for Trump or you didn't vote for Trump, that's fine. Whether you voted for Kamala Harris or you didn't, that's fine. This ain't about any of that, okay? This is about a war that's been going on for 3 years where hundreds of thousands, even over 1 million soldiers have been killed, okay? So here's part of the problem with the media and why people are irritated with the media and the government officials like Trump. He's not a government official per se, but this is one of the reasons why there's a fed up with the media. Because you're covering a bunch of crap that no one cares about. What they eat, who they eat with, the fact that they're dining with their enemy or even meeting with their enemy. Give me a break, people. Can we focus on the main thing? So, at any rate, that's my take on it. I think we need to play this out. We need to wait. We need to see what happens. Give Marco Rubio a chance to see what he can work out. Let's give them a chance to see what they can come up with. Go out and give this a chance to work, people. Give this a chance to fail. Just give it a chance, okay? So let's wait. Let's see what happens. We'll come back and look at it again. And that's how I see it.